Delegate Statler, I will open the floor with you. If you and by the way, Delegate Statler is the vice chair of the House Education Panel this year. Congratulations on that, Delegate. I think that's.
Thank you.
Hope I didn't do. I think that's official. I hope I didn't.
No, that is official.
Okay, very good, Joe. Thank you, sir. Can you give us a little bit about what you're seeing and hearing that we're going to be looking at for education, especially from the House side?
Yes, I can. And I would want to start out by telling you that I'm thankful to be on with such an impressive panel. I hope I can just live up to the standards of the persons that you have on this panel. And I am the vice chair of education on the House side. And I've actually started serving on my 6th year in the legislature. And I'm from the 51st District of Monongalia County, where I served 10 years on their Board of Education. And I believe that helps to bring a wealth of experience into it, because if you've ever served on the Board of Education, you know that truly what you believe is happening is not necessarily always the way it's happening. I will tell you that we as a committee, I believe we're excited to get started, because we have some of the known legislation that we are working on out there that I think is very exciting and can move this state forward and help our students in a tremendous way. And so I'm excited to get started on that. And I'll just give you some of them that we're looking at. We're looking at legislation that West Virginia has always been recognized for their pre-K and kindergarten programs that's out there. We've been a leader in a lot of areas on that. Some of it is for the same reasons that we're looking at this legislation. We're able to keep the number of students per adult in the classroom ratio down in that area by using assistants in the classrooms. We're looking at adding and bumping it on up to the 1st and 2nd grade levels in the state of West Virginia. If you have more than 12 students in the classroom, then you will be required to have an assistant into that classroom. Now, the legislation, the Department of Ed and everybody is working on the fine tuning, getting this legislation ready. But I would say to you, as in any piece of legislation, you know, as it moves forward, there'll be some things to look at on. But as a whole, this piece of legislation, I believe, will be tremendously productive in this state, in as it allows students more one-on-one with the students. And I don't believe anybody on the panel would argue that the smaller size of the classroom, it actually adds to the help that we can give these students. So this will be a way of getting more help on them so that they understand what we are trying to put out to them, so that when we move forward, that we have a better foundation built, because we know the building of the foundation in education is critical, so that these students has what they need, especially in the reading skills, to move forward as they go in. And we also know that when we look at these areas and do this, we also know the investment up front, which is going to be approximately a little bit over 1,800 classrooms. We know that, but the projections are showing with everything added in a way they're looking at it now, it will be about $68 million investment that will be added on. And it's good to say, while we're talking about this also, as we're talking about a state that needs some opportunities for some jobs out there, adding 1,800 people onto paying roles in the state of West Virginia will be both good, but it'll be challenging, because we know that we're having problem finding people now that sometimes are qualified in these areas. So we will lean on the institutions out there to work with us to develop the skills that's needed in some of these areas. It's not that they're just going to come right out. So I think that is one piece of legislation that we're going to have out there that I really believe can be a game changer in this state. And we'll move quickly on working that one through the system. You know, Another piece of legislation that I think is going to be unique is looking at our funding formula for our colleges and universities. And I see Ms. Martin on there, and I know that she's been working on this along with a lot of other institutions out there, and they have shared some of the information with us. We don't have it all. I don't have it before me today, but I can tell you that my thoughts are that this is just going to be another piece of legislation that will really help. And working with the EPC and the higher education group that's been working on this, I want to applaud them for their looking at something that they know can help and change and give them some certainty, reliability, in their funding source. As you know, every year they come down to Charleston and look at the finance and say, okay, this is what our needs is. This is where we are. And, they may be productive at that, and they may also end up with a cut. There's no real stability in that process the way it is. In K through 12, we have that stability in the process that we know how we're going to put the money out there through the step process. So basically, I would liken this to that process that the colleges and universities will also have some certainty that they can go on, that they don't have to wait until the end of session when the budget is passed to know approximately where their money will be. Now, does that mean that they may not come with requests and special things that's out there? No, it doesn't. And that's fine. That's just part of the process that is out. They have new programs that comes up. They know that they can do better if they have some of these programs. So by all means, I don't see that limiting it, but it will give them certainty in knowing approximately how much money they will have going forward. I just think that when you're looking at all this and what they do, that it just adds into, a rational way of doing that. The third thing that I think is going to be important and unique coming up in this session, and it will reach several committees, is we're looking at a pay increase. These discussions began several months ago with under the leadership of the House, Senate, and governor's branch, the executive branch, as revenues continue to come in exceeding expectations of what we had. It was easily to see that we may be able to revisit this area and look at giving out some pay raises across the board, which I think is a good thing. And the thing that's nice about this was not triggered by any request. This was the group looking together and saying that we may be able to do this. And we know as we get pay increases, it is a long term. It's not short term, because pay increases, once they're out there, you don't generally take them back. You may have to reevaluate, but generally that's not the rule. We also know that it adds on to other costs that's out there. So we're looking very hard at this, but this will be another piece of legislation that I believe will get a lot of attention, a lot of movement forward. We're saying those things and looking at them. We all know sitting here right now that, and I don't know how many bills are in the hopper. I haven't checked in the last couple of days. It's out there, but we know how legislation works. We know that our legislators are coming back off of being home, talking to their constituents, to the groups that they answer to, and they will have other legislation that they believe their certain area, or maybe statewide, a change in the code of 18A that could address issues that they're concerned with. So we know we'll have those coming forward. We'll evaluate them as they come before the committee. And I'm certainly happy to be able to work with Chairman Ellington on his committee. As you said, it's a big task that we do, but I'm certainly up to the task and look forward to moving forward. And I guess in closing, I would just like to say to you, I thank you for the opportunity to be on a panel with such esteemed persons that's on this panel talking about education, because the way that we learn is basically by looking out and sharing ideas with each other. No idea is a bad idea. It just means sometimes we have to work together to come up with a solution. And I believe we're up to that this year. And I think it's going to be an exciting session for education. Thank you.
Delegate Statler, thank you. And I have to agree, the experience of being on a county school board is unique, but certainly a building block for your committee. We appreciate you being there. We'll stay with the House now, and we'll go, and hopefully Delegate Evans was having some internet problems, but Delegate Evans, if you're available, I'd like to have a few comments from you now on the minority positions on education this time. And I'd like to have you have about 10 minutes, if you would. No more than 10, please. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody from McDowell County. It's a cold, snowy day here, as I'm sure it is in many of your areas. I am having some router issues when the power kicks off and on. It's been doing that all morning. I tend to lose internet. Hopefully, I'll be able to stick around with you. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Statler, for Delegate Statler, who's a very dear friend of mine, for his comments on some of the proposed legislation. Now, granted, I haven't seen any of that legislation, and do look forward to the session and hearing what will happen this year. You know, I'm an old teacher. I retired, taught for 35 years. And one of the things I always told my students is that real education takes place in evaluation of what you just did. You know, if I taught a science concept, which I'm an old science teacher, if I taught a science concept, let's reflect back on what we did and what we learned. One of the greatest things that we could do in education is reflect upon what we've done in the past and see if it's working right now, and then look at possible ways to improve what we did or did not do in the previous sessions. I think we've had some issues that have come up. We've got some lawsuits now from some of the issues last year. So we need to be reflecting, I think, on what we do. We're not talking a lot of times with our teachers, the people that are in the classrooms on the front lines. We sort of begin to make policies before we consult those that it's going to affect the most. I'm thrilled with the fact that our teachers are expecting a pay raise, but you know we should also be looking at ways to recruit these young people, the brightest and our best that are coming out. I just spoke recently with a young man who is from our area, and he went to Ohio Valley College there, and it wound up closing. Wanted to teach math, and he's now moving to Glenville State so that he can continue his education in teaching math. There are people out there that want to teach in areas that we're losing. Concord lost their math program. Dr. Martin, I don't know if you still have a math program there for education at Fairmont, but we're losing programs left and right. And I think there is a body of people out there that we're forgetting altogether. Let's look at the kids that are autistic out there. What are we doing? What are we doing for those kids once they graduate from high school? What programs do they have available? Marshall has a program in autism. They had it at Concord. That's now gone by the wayside. And unfortunately, my own son was in that program. But there are ways that we can be addressing the needs of specific groups of people. And I think we need to explore that more. Nursing is a real problem. Some of the colleges are now putting out programs where they'll have nursing programs. I'm thrilled with that. But what about teaching programs? Education has become a real issue. We don't have in many counties. I know in southern West Virginia, I can't speak for the northern counties, but down here, the education people I've spoke with, especially board members and teachers, they're telling me that they simply can't fill the jobs. We're using people that take weekend classes that have a degree in whatever, and suddenly they're a trained teacher. I taught for a long time before I considered myself a trained teacher. When I come out of college, I had a degree and I had some background, but I had to learn to be a teacher over time. And I think that's one of our problems today. We're losing our youngest. We're losing them left and right. They come in, they spend a couple of years, and they decide that that's not for them. We've got to figure out what the problem is. Is it discipline? We haven't had. I've been on the education committee now for this will be my 6th year, and we have yet to see a program or a bill that's passed out of the House that deals with one of our biggest problems, which is discipline. We have standardized test issues. We're doing an awful lot with computers now, and how's that translating to the actual test scores later on in the spring when they're being tested? There are so many things that are problems that I don't have the answers to. Off the top of my head. Delegate Statler was right. We need to learn from each other. We need to hear ideas. We need to share those ideas. I look forward to discussing some of the issues and some of the questions you may have. But I'll stop here for now. But we've got a real opportunity before us as the session starts, and it takes all of us. The old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a whole state to fix the education system. So let's move ahead and see if we can't do that. So Don, I thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the panel, and look forward to answering some questions.
Thank you, Delegate Evans. We appreciate you and your experience. It brings a lot of viewpoint. We're getting some questions in the chat now, but I want to go on and I'll make sure I'm glad we have such experts at the back end of this. Also, Dr. Martin and Dr. Sorber and Dale Lee to work from the education side. But right now I want to go to the Senate. Senator Stallings, I know you're in the minority in the Senate, but would you address us, please, and let your thoughts on where we are with what you're hearing from your own education and your education accountability, and what your thoughts are as we go into this session.
Well, thank you, Don, and it's good to be here with everyone, and thanks for shining a light on such an important issue. I want to shift to the left a little bit, and I want to go a little further up in altitude, the 30,000 foot looking down situation. Before this pandemic, we had, some significantly poor education outcomes in general. We've had a lot of social economic issues, and certainly Delegate Evans and McDowell County and the Southwest Coalfields, we know about that, in real time and in color. A long time ago, we had the option of really, really beefing up the birth to 3. We know that 85% of brain development happens between birth and 3 years old. We just didn't have the money. We couldn't, at that time, maybe we did and thought we didn't. Maybe there was such a lull before you would see that return on investment. So we focused on pre-K, and we are a great pre-K state. We're ahead of the curve. But I still think with all the COVID money coming from the federal government, we did spending authority bills for up to $2 billion. Now get that, 2 billion new fresh dollars coming into West Virginia to help with our social ills. And we have to use that money the best way possible. And again, I think we have to somehow robust up, if you would, the birth to 3 program. We don't have a bad birth to 3 program, but we just need to put it on steroids, if you would, because that's the only thing that's going to down the road save us. Okay, so, and again, the mental health issues of this pandemic is just glaring. In fact, the Surgeon General just released an emergency call to action to protect children's mental health. A few years ago, we put in some money for those wraparound services. Just like education workforce, just like healthcare workforce, we don't have those social services workforce either. So I don't know how we can do that to cooperate between Workforce West Virginia and the higher education system, that we're putting people out into the workforce that has a great need, they'll have a great purpose, and they can change lives over time. So the workforce issue is just something we have to do, and it can't happen overnight. The problem is we've not valued some of those people that we need so badly now, the social workers, the drug rehab counselors. So, again, so we have to look at where we are, and we are not in a pretty place, folks. Okay, I mean, we have 20% of our children are living in poverty. 66% of our 3 and 4-year-olds are not in preschool. 70% of 4th graders are not proficient in reading, and 76% of 8th graders are not proficient in math. We have more than 10,000 homeless children, more than 60 or nearly 7,000 people in foster care. Our child welfare system needs a major tweaking. Now, folks, these are major issues that make what we're talking about moot for the have-nots. The haves will be okay. The haves, I mean, people that graduate that have 2 parents in their home and they're working, those kids are going to do great. They make us so proud. But the folks that are living in poverty, they're not going to be. So can we look at these workforce issues and 4-year degrees isn't for everyone. So, we must look at our skilled professionals, introducing our children and grandchildren to a wide range of professions, including technical and trade jobs at an earlier age. My worry is funding. We are about to lower the severance tax on coal and gas. We're about to cut personal income tax or do away with it, nearly half our budget. We're going to shift that burden over to people that have the less ability to pay for it. And we're going to continue to cut things that we should not have cut in the past. And so my fear is, I think it's real. I see Dale Leon here, and again, we've not looked at PEIA. Again, I was on a Zoom yesterday with David Ramsey at CAMC and Mountain Health folks. Can't get nurses. They're paying $150 an hour for out-of-state nurses to come in and try to arm up our hospitals. PEIA pays less than Medicaid. And again, that's in order to tamp down the cost, obviously, so that we don't have to do anything in that regard. So I hate to be a Debbie Downer here, but folks, we've got some heavy lifting to do. And again, I look at the social determinants of health, which is not the healthcare system. It's your job, your education background, et cetera. And those are the same issues that we have with education outcomes. So lots to do. I worry about, again, taking money out of the public school system and putting it in either homeschooling or private charter schools. I think we really have to get serious about this and realize there might be a small short-term fix, but we have to look down the road if we're going to have a workforce of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate that. As we stay in as you mentioned, the situation with teachers, and next on our list of speakers, Dale Lee, president of the West Virginia Education Association. And Dale, while we've heard some, I know you've talked to your people. Would you give us your insight on what you're looking for this session, what your concerns are, and what you're hearing?
Well, thank you for having me on this panel, Don. I appreciate the opportunity and thank the delegates and Senator Stallings for your work and what you're suggesting for this upcoming session. As you know, the WVPA has long been a proponent of public education for all of our kids. We have to address the shortages. We know there are teacher shortages, service personnel shortages, our bus drivers, our cooks, custodians, everywhere we have shortages. And the WVPA has been saying for as long as I can remember, and I've been president for 14 years now, and even before that we have to make our salaries comparable with our contiguous states. Now, I know the governor and the Senate and House leadership announced that a pay raise is coming. And we appreciate that. It's an opportunity to say thank you for the hard work that our educators have done, and our state workers, quite frankly, have done during this pandemic period. But we've been advocating to get our salaries competitive for a number of years. And until we do that, we're not going to fill these shortages. We have to address the substitute shortage. We have to address ways to get people in the class. And there are a number of ways that I'll share with the House and Senate Education Committees if they will allow me to address those shortages. And then we have to give respect back to our educators. Now, one of the ways to do that is if you want to make changes in public education, who are the experts of public education? It's the educators out there that are dealing with it each and every day. Many years ago, we had innovation zones in West Virginia, and we funded that for a few years. And then we stopped funding that. We have $1.2 billion of federal funding from the COVID, from the relief monies. We have a great opportunity to think outside the box here in West Virginia. Why don't we go to our educators? Why don't we say, what changes would you think need to be made in your classroom? What changes need to be made in your school? We have some money, let's do that. Now, the component to that and the caveat, the key to that is then it becomes incumbent upon the legislature, after we get rid of this one-time federal money, to fund those systems that are actually working. I'll give you a great example. Several years ago in the innovation zones, we had a program where they put an alternative setting in our elementary schools for kids that are being disrupted. Rather than send them home, they would put them in an alternative classroom setting to work on academics and behavior. It allowed for all the students to really excel and learn. We stopped funding that. If that works, and we know that it works, we know that small class numbers work, we know all these things work, then why don't we think outside the box, try these different programs, and then fund them, the ones that work, because that's the key component. Doesn't do any good to have a program for 3 years, the money, federal money leaves, and then you don't have the money to fund it and say, well, I'm sorry, we can't do that anymore. Even though it's successful, we can't do that anymore. Senator Stallings was right. We have to address PEI. The governor said that we won't have any increases this next year in PEI, and the governor said that he will fund the money for PEI the following year. I truly believe that. I believe that his intention is to not see any increases while he's the governor, and I applaud him for that. But he leaves office in 2025. And if you look at the 5-year projections for PEIA, you're looking at about a 15% premium increase and then about another 9% premium increase to the employees projected in those coming years. We have to find a solution for PEIA. The task force met, the task force did its job. We came up with a solution that everyone could agree to. It didn't require the state to fund it all. The employees had some skin in the game too. We've introduced the bill since 2019, and it hasn't even made it to a committee agenda yet. And even though it was seconded on the task force by now Senate President Craig Blair, we have to get that moving. We have to make sure that PEIA is funded for the future. Finally, I'd like to say that you know, our educators have done a tremendous job in this COVID era. It amazes me. I say all the time, I'm the luckiest man in the state of West Virginia. I get to go around and see how good our educators really are. But they are beat to death right now. When I was visiting schools back in October and November, it was like people thought it was May. That's how emotionally drained and mentally drained that everyone is right now. We have to provide some mental breaks, mental help to our educators, our students, and everyone. We have to recognize that these are unusual, trying times, and make sure that we're looking at the emotional and social well-being of everyone, including our students. It's not an easy task, but we have some money now. We have surpluses in the state. We have opportunities with the federal dollars that's come in. We can do some amazing things. Bring us to the table and let's sit down and figure out what to do and how to change public education for the better. But you can't do that by not having the people who are involved with it each and every day, the educators at the table. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end of this too.
Thank you, Dale. And for all the panelists, if you look in the chat function, there are questions coming in. You might be able to prepare yourself for some of the questions. We've talked about K through 12, and now I'll go to Dr. Martin, who has really been very involved in the funding formulas, both the existing and the new projects they're working on. Dr. Martin, can you give us some insight and your thoughts?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And I'm very honored to be on this panel today, representing not just Fairmont State University, but also the West Virginia Council of Presidents. Before I begin, Delegate Lee, just so that you know, Fairmont State University has an incredible program for students with autism, and we are able to get them in and get them out graduated so that they can become productive citizens here in West Virginia. So come on over, we'll be happy to have you. You know, I'm very grateful to have been asked, as you all know, at the request of the legislators, the West Virginia Council of Presidents, together with Chancellor Tucker, Dr. Treadway, and many of the staff at the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, as well as the institutions across the state, have been working on a performance-based funding formula for higher education. And while we do not have yet a finalized proposal, I wish to advise you of the monumental progress that we have made thus far, and perhaps give you a little bit of the proposed framework that we are developing. First, as the title would suggest, the formula will focus on outcomes. For the baccalaureate institutions, there are 5 outcomes that are being considered. The first is a progression metric for students who are accumulating 30, 60, and 90 credit hours each year. Secondly, completion metrics will focus on associates, bachelor's, master's, postmaster certificates, doctoral, and law degrees earned at all public institutions by students in West Virginia, and there will be a premium assigned to those who graduate. Third, there is an expenditure research and development metric, which aims to represent expenditures on activities eligible for indirect and direct cost allocation. There is also a workforce outcome metric, which we've already discussed the need for workforce metrics. So, and this will obviously focus on graduates who are earning wages in West Virginia or who are pursuing additional postgraduate education. Finally, there is an efficiency metric, which measures the number of unique West Virginia resident students earning an academic degree relative to the number of degrees being produced by the institution. Within each of these metrics, the funding formula is going to provide institutions with additional recognition for supporting and investing in a myriad of populations critical to the state's interests that often perhaps go unrecognized in other funding formula. For example, populations like academically underprepared students, or adult students who are determined as those who are 25 years of age or older, and certainly are low-income students. Further, this formula will provide an additional credit for institutions to graduate and educate students into fields aligned with the state's economic and workforce priorities as determined by fields determined by the Department of the Commerce. And this metric adds a premium for also bachelor's degrees that are completing in 8 semesters or less. And the purpose of that, as you can imagine, is to reduce student load and the debt load of our graduates. Taken together, these metrics will allow institutions to directly support the students in attaining a degree on time while producing job-ready graduates who are able to meet the evolving economic needs of the state, thereby providing taxpayers with enormous returns on their investment, while also ensuring that the institutions continue to advance their unique missions in higher education for the public benefit. I wish to tell you that this has been a collaborative process that started almost 2 years ago. And yes, it was somehow pulled apart by the pandemic, but we have been steadfast chipping away at it. And the legislative leadership has been extremely open to the exchange of ideas, to listening to the concerns of the presidents, and to ensuring a very transparent process. And I'm very, very grateful to them and for that privilege. This formula is not perfect by any means, but we're very grateful to have had a voice. The formula does not take into consideration, for example, additional new funding to reward institutions for the achievement of their goals. Rather, 30% of the current base operating allocation that is provided to each state institution will be earmarked for the outcomes-based funding. Obviously, you can imagine we have some concern. We're still fighting a pandemic seemingly without end in sight. The demographics of college-age going students are continuing to decline, not just in West Virginia, but nationwide. In addition, a report that came out just a couple of months ago, or a couple of weeks ago, actually, by the National Clearinghouse found that because of the pandemic, 17% of students who could have gone to college this year chose not to go to college.
Hey, when are you going to nights?
I think next week I have to
That's, as you can imagine, a lot of students who are ready.
Oh, when on
On
Monday?
Monday morning. I thought it was earlier.
Oh, we can get you there.
Mark Curtis, you need to mute your mic, please. Mark Curtis, please mute your mic.
Mark, you.
Sorry. So as I was saying, 17% of the students who could have gone to college this year chose not to go. As you can imagine, that's a heck of a lot of students who are out of our pipeline at a time when maintaining and building new pipelines are critical to our institutions to fuel the economy. And as you can imagine, allocating 30% of the current base to growth gives us some concern. While most of us are very, very supportive of setting goals and being held accountable for the achievement of those goals, indeed, our accreditation is based on it. We are concerned that this is a very challenging time to implement a performance-based funding formula because our goals and the nature of higher education is rapidly evolving without much precedent because of this pandemic. We just don't have a baseline yet on which to measure our future in a constantly changing present. The good news is that we believe that this proposed funding formula is being structured in such a way that we will be able to build in some safeguards so institutions do not lose the entire 30% of their allocation, which, as you can imagine, would be disastrous. Part of that built-in safeguard is the ability to evaluate annually the model and assess whether or not it is allowing institutions to meet the needs of students and the needs of West Virginians effectively and efficiently. The model is also allocated on a 3-year rolling average for each data metric to soften the immediate effect of any large and any unanticipated swings in the data. One of the things that you may notice that is absent from the data is dual enrollment for high school students. And that is indeed another area that we would like to address. With the decline of enrollment statewide and nationwide, and a premium placed on completion, absent additional students enrolling in our educational systems long enough to earn a degree or a credential, there is a distinct likelihood that our institutions will see a significant decline in the number of students graduating in the next 3 to 5 years. this will obviously impact our ability, higher ed's ability to fill critical jobs within our states in order to meet the demands of industry and the demands of the public. So as such, developing a college-going culture in West Virginia is critical to the state's future, both for 4-year and 2-year institution. And we have already responded to this need by investing significant resources and funding into developing dual enrollment programs. However, the funding formula at this present time does not account for those investments, which will hurt an institution's ability to develop or grow our dual enrollment programs in the future. And we are concerned that such a trend would be profoundly detrimental to public education in this state. Now, while we realize that dual enrollment to support high school students in earning credit towards a degree may not necessarily belong in a performance-based funding formula, we would like to perhaps have discussion with legislative leadership to consider a separate funding source through the creation of new programs to encourage perhaps innovation, collaboration, and efficiencies in these areas. Some ideas are perhaps setting up a scholarship programs for high school students who attain a certain number of dual enrollment credits who would qualify to receive a stackable yearly scholarship to attend college in West Virginia. Another possibility may be to create scholarships so students who may not have the funds to pay for these dual enrollment classes out of pocket may be able to tap into these additional funds and take the courses. Another idea may be to develop a new funding item or a program through the West Virginia Department of Education to develop curriculum or criteria for high school teachers so that we can ensure that we have qualified teachers in high school who are able to teach dual enrollment credit. The reality for dual enrollment is that institutions lose money on dual enrollment every year. And if we're supposed to expand programming to provide support to meet students' needs, higher education and public education partners have to have adequate investments to be able to enhance some of these programs and to do it well. The discussion continues. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Dr. Moore.
I was just wanted to finish out and say that the discussion continues, and we've been very, very grateful to the legislature who have sincerely interested in hearing from us. What we are hopeful and deeply thankful of the level of collaborative work that has been accomplished so that we can meet the expectation of our legislators and to address the needs of West Virginians so that we can all build a brighter future for all of us. So thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an overview.
Well, thank you for the overview, and we look forward to seeing some more details and seeing what that is as we can research that. Thank you very much. And now we'll go to Dr. McHenry Sorber, WVU Education Leadership, to talk a little bit about what she sees with education and her study, which those of you in the media group, that was released yesterday. We sent you links and WVU sent links out also. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Dr. McHenry Sorber.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me to participate today. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some research that I've been doing with a colleague at WVU, Matt Campbell, for several years now around teacher staffing challenges in West Virginia. So over a multi-year period at this point, we've interviewed a number of policymakers, West Virginia superintendents, folks from other states that are predominantly rural who've been involved in initiatives designed to improve teacher recruitment and retention efforts. And more recently, we decided it was really important to get closer to the problem of staffing. And so we focused our research on interviewing principals across the state of West Virginia. So I want to say first that there are a lot of large-scale national data sets that try to explain the problem of teacher staffing. The Learning Policy Institute, for example, has state-by-state scorecards of the teaching profession. But one of the problems we've found is that these national data aren't always reflective of the status of teaching in West Virginia. So for example, the teacher shortage in West Virginia is increasing at the same time student enrollment is decreasing. But even the state level trend isn't necessarily reflective of on the ground realities in particular West Virginia communities. And what we have found is that this community level perspective is really essential in understanding teacher staffing challenges, particularly because the teacher labor market is so very localized. So we know, for example, that remote rural schools tend to experience greater challenges in recruitment and retention than other communities, as do schools along state borders where teacher pay is substantially higher. So for example, teacher pay in Maryland is about $10,000 more than it is in West Virginia, and in Virginia about $5,000 more. In contrast, while all schools seem to be feeling the effects of a teacher shortage, those that are located near post-secondary institutions with teacher preparation programs tend to fare a bit better, at least in an initial pool of candidates available to fill positions. So we've heard a lot of things this morning already that I would say contribute to teacher staffing challenges based on our research. One of those obviously is teacher pay, as Dale has mentioned. Another problem that we see in West Virginia is the percentage of women that are bachelor's degree holders, which is only about 21%. And that's particularly important because the majority of teachers in this state, as in all states, are predominantly women. But we also found beyond these more obvious issues that there are a lot of contextual factors that affect teacher staffing. And so in our research, we have found things that create or exacerbate teacher staffing challenges include things like road conditions, services available, so doctor's offices, dentist offices, proximity to grocery stores, local population characteristics, so communities that experience protracted economic distress or decline, those communities that have a high prevalence of drug use, and proximity to a neighboring state all contribute to greater staffing challenges. So in short, what we found is that place really matters. And in our research, you can read about some of those real challenges. So for example, we interviewed a principal who had a first grade classroom with no teacher. And so that principal filled that space with 7 different substitutes over the course of the school year. And the principal talked to us about really the long-term effects of first graders not having access to a full-time certified teacher in that position. But we also see in some places like rural tourist destinations that principals have a pool of educated locals, even if they're not certified teachers, who can return to fill vacancies, even if those aren't on a long-term basis. And all of these differences are compounded by the principals themselves. So sometimes principals are from a particular community, and we then are and then are able to think about the strengths of that community and rely on long-term personal relationships they've developed with community members, which might include former students from their schools. They might include retired teachers who they convinced to come back to the classroom, or other young graduates of bachelor's degree programs who are interested in coming to the community for a while.
Legislative look ahead. And they're talking about education right now. I don't care.
Gayleen, could you mute, please? Thank you.
Sorry.
We also see differently that new to place principals or newcomer principals seem to lack these personal relationships that long-term principals are reliant on. And so it's much more of a struggle for them to fill challenges using those personal local relationships that their counterparts have developed. We saw the same problem happening with principals in consolidated schools, which seem to create new and different challenges for principals because consolidation disrupts the community connections that might have otherwise existed and requires the establishment of new ones. So what we have found based on our work is that one important implication is to provide targeted mentorship for principals to help them create and maintain connections with key community stakeholders. Certainly something that we found throughout this work is that there are a lot of political debates around responses to teacher staffing challenges. Alternative certification is one of them. And we see a host of policy mechanisms that have been put in place to try to mitigate these shortages. What we have found is that first, these seem to have really uneven effects, right? So what is effective in Fayetteville is not necessarily effective in Welch and vice versa. We've also found that principals are so desperate to fill positions that they're not really concerned about the political contentiousness around a particular strategy, because they're just using everything at their disposal to try to fill vacancies. So some of the important implications from our work are that the unique and the place-specific challenges of staffing require really targeted place-specific policy responses that are grounded in the experiences of teachers and administrators. We see a real possibility for success at the local level by investing in principals with ties to the community and in helping new principals forge and maintain important ties with the community. And we also found that schools near teacher preparation programs tend to fare better. One thing that we have seen in other countries with pretty good success is the placing of intern teachers across the state, including hard to staff areas. And so that is also one possible suggestion from our work. So I also want to say that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that because most of what the principals in our study talked about were contextual factors that exacerbate teacher shortages, certainly the pandemic, as Dale has mentioned, has been a huge point of exacerbation of the problem, not just in the state, but across the state. So there was a really recent nationwide survey that found that 48% of teachers nationwide admitted they'd considered quitting within the last 30 days. And that was up from 32% in June. So, so when we think about how to respond to teacher staffing challenges, it's really important that we look beyond high-level policies aimed at certification and think about really the multiple and complex political, social, and economic contexts that affect the work of teachers and their leaders. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate the information. And again, there's a PDF version of that study out, and you can follow up. It's very impressive how all of the panelists and their information tied together. It's clear that education is one big picture we're all trying to address. We have now about 20 minutes for media questions. We have some in the chat already, and I'll go to the first one. And actually, it's from Stephen Adams with Ogden News, and it's to Delegate Statler and to Dr. Martin. Stephen says the funding formula has been a desire for the legislature for several years, but he questions why it's being done exclusively by the Higher Education Policy Commission and the working group without lawmaker involvement. Can we have some comment on that, please? Dr. Martin?
Well, I would say from
Dr. Statler, Delegate Statler, go ahead.
I would say from my perspective that while I have not been intimately involved, they have been before the committee, the Joint Committee on Education. A couple times we've had persons before us talking about this funding formula. I have met with some other colleges about the funding formula that is out there and what's going on and how they're doing it. I think that leadership in the fact, and I am just short term as a vice chair of education, so I've not been involved in a lot of those meetings. They have been listening to that group. I can assure you that more than likely, I'm going to assure you that this group has not moved forward without at least talking to some of the chairs about what they're trying to do to see if there would be an interest to even look at this from a legislative perspective. And I can guarantee that they have talked to the chair of finance and probably education and probably higher leadership. So I don't believe it's been a complete vacuum that we've not been involved. We have not been involved as a total legislative body. And as you know, no matter what comes out, once it gets into the system and starts working through the committees, it's open for change, amendments, and looking at it. So first, you got to get things started. You got to get the background. That's why we do interim meetings. And I'm really appreciative of those interim meetings so that we can work and look at some of these issues and give a nod. Do we move forward, or this is something we're not interested in? That would be my perspective.
Thank you, sir. And from the perspective of the West Virginia Council of Presidents, this funding formula came about at the request of the legislature. And so HEPC has the tool set to be able to do some of the research, to be able to provide some examples and some proposals to the legislature. This is certainly by no means a fait accompli. As Delegate Statler, Chairman Statler noted, once this proposal is provided to the legislature, then obviously the real conversation will begin. However, having said that, I wish to assure you that HEPC and some of us have had intricate and HEPC certainly almost daily or everyday conversations with leadership in both the Senate and in the House. Senator Tarr, chairman of the Finance Committee, Delegate Chairman Householder, chairman in the Finance Committee in the House, as well as others who have given HEPC suggestions as to what to take into consideration, what not to take, some of the alignment to ensure that there's a premium provided for graduation came as a suggestion of the chairman. Some of the suggestions to tie our degree production to areas of need through the Department of Commerce came as a suggestion from the leadership, the legislative leadership. So this has not been a process that has been in a vacuum, devoid of legislative input. Quite the opposite. It has been the legislature who have guided HEPC's research into getting to this point. And as I noted when I spoke, the president still have some concern. And these are concerns that as we meet with education, with Delegate Statler, with Chairman Ellington, with others, and they have questions of their own, then we will be able to address them. But it has been certainly a very, very, very collaborative process.
Good. Thank you for those answers. And to all the panelists in the chat, if we don't get to all the questions, feel free to look at the questions in the chat. And then if you want to respond by email or to the reporters, you have the information, I believe, on all the media. I sent those out so I can facilitate that if you don't get a chance to answer them now. For Delegate Evans, example of how discipline in education is one of the biggest problems in our state. Delegate Evans, are you still on?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
I am hearing some, I don't know, just syllables every so often from some of the speakers. Hopefully hear me okay. But anyway, if you take a look at the time that the kids were off during the pandemic last year, some of the problems that they have at home are being brought to the school systems. We're at points now that we need social workers in just about every school that we have. If a kid is not feeling safe at school, then they're worrying about their personal safety and worrying about what might happen when they walk down the hall or go to the bathroom alone or whatever. How are they going to have a positive experience in the classroom? We have 55 boards of education and 55 discipline policies. Some of those are, dictated, I guess, by some metric through the state. But bottom line is we have 55 different policies. We have kids that are exposed to media, that are seeing the shootings that take place in other places, and those could happen anywhere at any time. And I'm sure those things are on the backs and their minds. Some of the statistics that I have from the State Department of Education our national state, the National Department of Education tell us that 21% of kids in kindergarten through 12th grade have been bullied. 21%, that's one in 4 kids almost. And we see these problems manifesting themselves in the classrooms, in the hallways, in the cafeterias. These kids need to feel safe in school. They need to make sure that they are being properly supervised by teachers. They're supervised on the buses. These incidences of bullying, of just being picked on take place everywhere, not just in the classroom. Kids have to feel safe. Parents have to feel safe. Parents have to know that when they give their kids over to that bus driver in the morning, from the time that they leave till the time they get home, that their kids are going to be treated fairly and safely. We're seeing some statistics that are really alarming. I hate to get into the racial portions of it, but Black students are proportionally being suspended at a much higher rate than other races, and we're seeing that these kids are suffering in their education because of it. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It's just we're seeing on and on and on these fights that take place. We're seeing even after school activities. We're seeing them at ball games. We're seeing anything that the school system is putting on. We're seeing problems. There are some school systems nationally that don't even have home games because it's not safe to do so. We recently played a football game a few years ago with a school out of Washington where they're not allowed to play home games. They had to come to us, which, I don't know how productive that is. School safety is huge. It has to be considered in everything that we do, including having qualified, teachers. We're seeing PROs in all the schools now, and those guys are pretty busy.
Okay, well, Delegate, I'm sorry. Thank you. I mean, for bringing that to our attention. I greatly appreciate it. Our next question then will go with to Delegate Statler. House and Senate leaders planning to make pay raises part of a larger bill, doing more things, or will it be a separate bill? And if it's a larger bill, what else do you think will be in there, Delegate Statler? How do you think they'll be approached?
Well, certainly I can't look into the crystal ball of what people will do with some of this legislation when it gets in committee. As I said, anything can be amended and added on. I do not believe that is the purpose of this bill. I believe it will be offered and run as a pay increase bill, and that it will move forward like that. It will not have a lot of tag-ons, but again, I can't guarantee anybody because it has to go through a process that will allow for changes and amendments to be added. I don't know how successful that will be. I doubt that it will be. I think it'll be a pretty clean bill.
Delegate, we've seen some bills that have been introduced early in the session and have run through, and they're through the process relatively quickly in the first couple of weeks. If I can add to that question, do you see this as this was announced with the governor 2 weeks ago? Do you see this being one of the first bills that you're presented?
Again, that's above my pay grade. I can't say what bills will move, when they will move. That's certainly in the speaker's realm of making that out there. I can tell you that with the response, at least that I've been hearing from both sides and the executive branch, I would venture to say that this bill will move fairly quickly in the process. Again, you got to remember that, especially from the finance, and I serve on that committee, you want any type of bills that's going to add to the budget constraints. You need to have those bills fairly early on because it will add into how you set your budget up.
Okay, very good. Actually, I think the next question comes to you too. Any plans? What are you hearing about the next steps for charter schools?
that piece of legislation has already been acted upon and is out there, and it's presently in the court system. I think that we will have to let it run its course to see where it comes out of that system, how it's going to be, and then we will have to act appropriately. Now, whether that will be done while we're in session, I have no way of knowing. I don't think it'll be able to run that full course of action that's out there. So I don't think, from my perspective, that you'll see a lot going on until we understand exactly where we're at with that.
Sorry, I was muted myself and couldn't get back on. Let's see. The next question, Dr. Martin, do you have any indication of how many of the 17% non-college options who chose the non-college options to continue education and training? And I'm sorry, I'm not reading this very well. Do you have any indication how many of that 17% chose non-college options to continue their educations and training with apprenticeships, for example? And how many just ended their formal education with high school and went to the workforce? I'm sorry, Dr. Martin, you're muted.
So sorry, thank you. I knew I was going to do that once at least today. The National Clearinghouse normally only focuses on the demographics of the students and whether or not they go to college. And college is defined as either a 2-year college or a community college or a 4-year institution. So many of the apprenticeships, as you know, are housed in community colleges. So therefore, that population would be housed within that strata. So I'm going to go out on a limb and make the assumption that these individuals chose not to undertake community college apprenticeships because, again, they're housed in community colleges or 4-year institution and are out in the workforce. I know for Fairmont State University, I can tell you that many of the students who chose not to come to Fairmont State, because we follow through and follow up with them, what they didn't want to come in the middle of a pandemic. They didn't feel that they felt scared. They were living with elderly parents or grandparents. They didn't want to bring the virus home. Many of them felt that because we didn't have, West Virginia does not have reliable infrastructure for Wi-Fi or for internet or for broadband, that they couldn't take many of their classes via WebEx or via the internet. And even at that, as a freshman, we do not encourage students to take classes through internet. You need to be able to form community. You'd be able to have that personal touch so that they are taught how to learn properly, how to study properly. And it's essential that at least we believe as educators that first year that it be a face-to-face environment. So what we were told for those who we reached out to who chose not to come to Fairmont State was that they were taking a leap year during which they're going to be working somewhere or doing something. And they're not saying that they're not coming back to school. They're just saying they're taking a leap year, which I suspect is the issue and what's occurring nationwide.
That certainly makes sense. We have a question from Kenny Bass. How are we going to staff 1,800 first and second grade classrooms with adults? I guess this is to you, Delegate Statler. When there are literally shortages across the board in every existing education and school service position. So those teachers' aides, how are we going to find those people when we can't fill the existing positions we have now?
Well, that's certainly going to be an issue. There's no doubt about it. We have talked about that, that when you create 1,800 plus new positions out there and you have a shortage in the areas you are, some of it in some of the areas of the state will probably not have near the problem that other problems in the state has. Some of the training issues that we have to look at. How will this assistant be structured? That will make a big difference as to what the staffing issues will be. And of course, as we move forward into these areas, we're going to have to rely on some help from the colleges and the universities and career technical colleges out there to turn out some folks that will qualify for these jobs. So it looks like at least front out, and I've not seen the legislation totally, but we're looking at 24, I believe 25 school year to start kicking some of this in. I know that's a ways down the road, but that will give us some time to at least look at some of these issues that's going to be out there. And this is one that we have talked about. We know it's going to be an issue, but we simply think that the right thing to do is to move forward, because you got to move forward and put the proposal out there before you can find all the issues are going to be.
Thank you, Delegate Statler. Dr. McHenry-Sorber, to the delegate's point, having assistants in the classroom, with you have more than 12, you get a teaching assistant. Would that be as a positive, do you think, when your study, that more teachers might be willing to work in the classrooms? It might be easier to fill the initial jobs if they knew they had a potential for an assistant. Is that something to factor?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question. And, teaching assistants is a pipeline that we have actually begun to look at in our research, because they tend to be from the local community and are interested in staying, and employment in the school provides a way for them to stay local and be involved in children or the work of schools. So we've actually started thinking about that as a potential pipeline for filling classroom vacancies, right? So taking teaching assistants and then helping them to get certified. But there, I guess what I would say is there are no perfect solutions. We certainly know from our work that teachers are experiencing really just increased workloads, which is a real challenge in retention. I don't know that particular mechanism would aid in any way with recruitment of initial teachers. It's hard to say whether it would help with retention, but I think that given our interviews with principals, they are certainly open to any and all possibilities that might help them recruit and retain teachers.
Okay,
Dawn,
thank
do you mind if I chime in just briefly?
No.
There's a P20 program. If you know where a group or a cluster is needed, such as in teachers, you can get that started if you have someone with a calling early and even in high school. The P20 program has potential to help address this. Maybe we can look at that.
And Don, if you don't mind, if my concern to Delegate Statler is, I understand the desire to put aides in the classroom as teachers' assistants. My hope is that you're not going to increase the class size of those classrooms to do that. And secondly, the other alternative then is to possibly look at reducing the class size. Right now, first grade, second grade can have 25 kids, and you could accomplish the same goal, so to speak, as reducing the class size to 20. But again, you can run into the problems of getting certified teachers in those classrooms, as well as the certified aides.
Okay, thank you all for that information and for the preview. With that, we are over our time. There are more questions in the chat. I encourage panelists to take a look, and if you can answer one of those and email the person. If you need any information, contact me. We thank everybody for being on the panel and our media. I won't ask for a round of applause because everybody's muted, but take it for granted. We thank you all very much. We're going to leave this link up. It will go to the next one. Our next panel is at 10:45 with leadership. And we again thank our sponsors, AARP West Virginia, the West Virginia Press Association Foundation, West Virginia University Relations, and West Virginia International Yeager Airport. Again, with that, thank all of you for joining the call and your expertise, and we look forward to a positive session for education in West Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
President Blair, glad you can join us. We'll be getting started here about 10:45. We just finished our education panel. It was a great panel. Glad you're on the call, sir.